Today I'm going to talk about what I look for before moving on to the next stone with this knife. So today we're going to go over an interesting question we got in the comments, and that is how I decide when to move on to the next stone. I'm not exactly sure what the question is referring to, whether it's edge sharpening or resurfacing, or refinishing or polishing. And those two topics are really very different from each other when it comes to deciding when to move on to the next stone. So today we're going to start with edge sharpening. So the techniques that I'm using on each stone are different depending on the knife, depending on the steel, but the results that I'm looking for are often the same. So my basic sharpening progression for most of the kitchen knives, depending on if it's a certain series that I'm doing or working on a knife for a customer, is a standard sharpening would be starting from 200 or 400, then going on to 1000, 3000, sometimes 6000 or 8000, and then a natural stone, depending if the steel or the blade needed that. In some cases, if needed, I will actually go down to a 120 stone, but often I'll start with a 200 or 400. So let's go over today's stone lineup. We got some requests recently to use some more accessible stones, so I've decided to throw in a few Naniwa-Chosera stones in this mix. So today we're going to be using NSK Kogyo 200, Naniwa-Chosera 400, Naniwa-Chosera 1000, Naniwa-Chosera 3000, and Nakayama Kita natural stone. So today we're going to be using a white one Gyuto, and this is actually a rough sharpened Kaiju that's in the process of sharpening. Right now the surface of this is at the 200 grit NSK stone. I thought this would be a good blade to start with for this video just because the edge has never been sharpened, so it's a good blade to start at 200 grit. The other thing I should mention is that the tests that we're doing on each stone I don't usually do because it would take too long for when I'm actually doing work. I'm doing sometimes 10 to 30 blades at one time, but it's a really good way for beginners to test their progress when they're sharpening on each stone to get a good feeling of what they need to be looking for. After that, when you get comfortable with it, you can use these tests at the end or during your sharpening process. So I'm doing 5 tests on the 200 grit stone. First is a nail test. After that, it's a visual check of the edge. After that, I'm using a light test, then a rolled tissue paper, and then a newspaper slice. So 200 grit, what am I looking for? The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to test it on my nails. What I'm looking for and what I'm looking to feel is a very specific catch and drag pull on my nails. After that, it's going to be visual. So I'm going to look at the edge under a light to look at first the shape that it's actually the shape I'm looking for, the bevel that I'm looking for, that it's even, that it's clean, that the scratch pattern across the bevel from the heel to the tip is also very consistent. And the next thing I'm going to look for is right down at the edge, right at the edge with the light on it, so that I can actually see that the blade, the apex, is very consistent and clean. After that, it's going to be a few different tests. The first test I like to do is a very tightly rolled piece of Kleenex, and that test I'm looking for a very clean and even cut that I can feel that the edge geometry and the condition of the blade is where I want it to be. The next test I'll do is actually with a newspaper, and I'll do a slice with the blade, and that's to hear the blade, how the actual edge sounds. Sometimes if you did a repair, I often have seen people doing repairs and they go to do a slice and then either catches, or you can actually hear that the blade is still not clean enough. So you may have to go back to the stone to get to where you want it to be. So after I do that slice test with the newspaper, and I'm pretty happy with all those results, then I'm going to move on to the next stone. In this case, going from 200 now to 400 grit. So there's 6 points for the 400 grit stone that I'm looking for. The first thing is testing the blade, the edge on a wet nail. The second thing is a visual test, looking that I removed the scratches from the previous stone. The third is another visual check with light, looking at the apex to make sure the blade's clean and even. And the fourth is, again, the rolled tissue paper. After that, we go to slicing with newspaper, and then the hair shaving test. On the 400 stone, I will create a burr on that stone, not substantial, but I will create a burr, and I'll also remove it again on the stone. And I'll pull as much as I can out of that stone as possible before I go on to test. So I'm going to do pretty much the same tests that I did on the 200 grit stone. I should add that I do test the edge on my nails on wet nails. I find that the water or having wet nails gives me personally more sensitivity to how the edge is catching, how it pulls. And after that, I'll go through the same thing again with the visual tests. I'm going to check the blade. Now, first thing I'm going to want to look at is, did I remove all the scratches from the 200 grit stone, and that I've got a very even scratch pattern across the blade on both sides. I'm going to do the same thing with light. I'm going to check down from a light source, checking right at the apex of the edge. And then I'm going to go again to rolled paper, rolled tissue test. And then I'm going to slice again with newspaper. Basically, this is all the same test. I'm looking for the same result at 400 grit. One thing I should add, at this point with the 400 grit stone, I wanted to cut hair actually. So I will do a hair shaving test on my hand or on my arm. And at this point, I'm not really looking that it's popping the hair. I'm just looking that it is able to shave hair. And if it kind of meets all this criteria, all these tests, passes all these tests, then I'm going to move on to the next stone. The next stone is going to be at 1000 grit. So now we're going to move on to the 1000 grit stone in this standard sharpening progression. Again, we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to do the technique I would use on this stone for that particular blade and particular steel. And then we're going to go on to checking the results. At this point, I'm not going to create another burr. What I'm now looking to do is actually to refine that edge as much as possible and get as much out of that stone as possible for that particular blade and steel. The results that I'm looking for are pretty much the same. We're looking for a wet nail test again, wanting to make sure we've kept that drag, that catch on the wet nails. Then we're going to do another visual check. Want to see that we've removed all the scratches from the previous stone, that being 400. Then we're going to do a light test again, just checking the apex of the edge to make sure it's even, that it's clean, that it looks the way it should be looking at 1000 grit. Sometimes this time, going from 400 to 1000, doing a light check, you can really see, is it a fully clean 1000 finish, or is there some points that I'm seeing that could actually be from the previous stone. So that light test is pretty important at this stage. After that, we're going to do another rolled tissue test, and then we're going to do a few different tests with newspaper. I'm going to do the same test where I slice through the newspaper for the hearing, for the sound of the edge, the blade. And then after that, we're going to do another test where I let the blade fall directly into the edge of the newspaper. So I want it to cut really cleanly, don't want it to have any resistance whatsoever. And then I'm going to roll the newspaper and do a check across the rolled newspaper to make sure that the edge is catching properly. And then we're going to do another hair shaving test as well. And that all those things, if all good, then we're going to go on to the next stone, which would now be 3000 grit stone. Not every blade, every steel needs to go past 1000 grit. A lot of blades can perform great at 1000 grit. And if I'm really happy about the sharpening on the stone, I've pulled out everything I can do on that stone for that blade, for that steel, and the blade has passed all the tests, all the checks that I want it to pass. Then I'm going to strop on felt and then strop on leather, and then I'll do a couple more tests. I'll test again on rolled tissue, and then do a few newspaper slices and cuts again. And if everything's good, then that's going to be it for that blade, that stone progression until 1000 grit. So there's 6 points we want to cover on the 3000 grit stone that we're looking for before we move on to the next stone. 1 is the nail test on wet nail. 2 is the visual check to make sure that we remove the scratches from the 1000 grit stone. 3 is another visual check with light to make sure that we've got a clean edge. 4 is rolled tissue paper cutting test. After that's another newspaper test, and then after that is a hair cutting test. The main difference with 3000 grit stone would be the cutting test, and at this stage I want to make sure that it's cutting push cut and a pull cut. The newspaper test is the same as 1000 grit. It's slicing, pushing down, letting it fall through the paper, and also cutting on a rolled newspaper to make sure it's catching properly. And then the last test would be hair cutting test. At this stage, the edge should easily be popping the hair. I'll move on to 3000 grit for knives or knife series that I'm working on that I feel actually would benefit from moving on to a 3000 grit stone in performance. And that can be different types of carbon steel, stainless steels, semi-stainless steel, powdered steel, honyaki, so really something that really will benefit from 3000 grit or beyond. So after 3000 grit, the next stone in this kind of standard progression that I'll use is a natural stone. On this stone, I'm going to go through pretty much the same thing. I'm going to use the technique on the natural stone that suits that particular blade, that particular steel. For the reason why I'll go to a natural stone is particularly for carbon steels, some carbon steels, Blue 1, Blue Super, Blue 2, and also some other type of steels like YXR7 or Kauri X. These type of steels, I really feel that natural stones can really bring out something special in those steels. Doing the same thing, doing the techniques on that stone, and pretty much looking at the same results. For the natural stone, I'm pretty much checking the same 6 points. Nail test, check the edge, check it with light, tissue, cut, push and pull, the newspaper cuts, slicing, and the different type of cuts. But for this last stone, the natural stone that I'm looking for is that it cuts the pulled tissue paper. It's really important for me to see that I actually got the result that I'm looking for, is that cuts one ply of tissue paper. So what I mean by that is take a piece of tissue paper, pull that tissue paper apart, and get your knife and do cuts or slices on that tissue paper. If the blade easily cuts and easily slices that tissue paper, then I'm really happy, and that's it. At the end of everything, I'm happy with all the results, the test results. After I've checked the edge again, after stropping on leather, did a few tests, then that's it. I'm happy with the results, and that blade is finished. That would be the end of the progression, of the sharpening progression. This is a pretty basic standard sharpening that I'm talking about in this video. It doesn't really apply to single bevel necessarily. This is really, I guess, talking about double bevel sharpening and fairly standard progression. And the next thing I should talk about is the type of tissue paper I use. Maybe someone's going to wonder, it's kind of strange, but there's so many different type of tissue paper out there, but this cashmere tissue paper that is recommended by many Japanese sword enthusiasts to use when cleaning swords, but also I find that it is excellent for cutting. The reason why is it's very, very dry and very clean, so I use cashmere tissue paper. I'm not sure if this is available all over the world, but the one point about this is that it's really dry tissue, not moist tissue that's good for colds and stuff. I hope that explained and covered my thought process and what I'm looking for when I'm moving from stone to stone. It is very different, as you can see, for each kind of grit range, but pretty much the same. And it's just that I'm really looking for very specific results, very consistent results, all through this entire process. So for the next video, we're just going to talk about the same topic, what determines why I move from one stone to the next stone, but it's going to be for polishing. So if you liked this video, found it interesting, informative, and it answered questions, then please like, subscribe, and continue to support us. And again, leave any comments or further questions you have, and we'll try to get to them in our next videos. And thanks again for watching. We really appreciate your support. See you in the next video.